honored at the opportunity to be here and to be called Dr. McCormack's friend. I will venture over the next 9 minutes not to embarrass him or abuse that. As has been stated, my job right now that I go to as primary occupation and get paid to do it is as the president of the Children's Defense Fund. I have to give all of those various qualifications because we all have so many jobs. We're all doing so much, and we find ourselves to be identified in vocation in so many ways. But that one comes to me now because I mostly understand myself as a youth pastor in the Black church tradition. And now I have 74 million young people in my youth group. Those 74 million, last summer, as we were paying attention to and caring for one another in the context of a pandemic, as we were following polls in the context of a presidential election, and as we, as you, here and across the country, wrestle with the reality of young people guiding us in protest, those 74 million changed markedly and forever in the American consciousness. Last year was the first year our youth group became predominantly people of color. The children of America are a Black and brown youth group in all of our care. Yet, one of them, as I prepared behind the stage, one of them came to be most present in my mind because one of them, an 18-year-old, is most prominent in the headlines right now. He does not reflect the predominant complexion of that group. He's 18. When many of us came to know him, he was 17, carrying a gun, having taken the lives of 2 people and wounded others. And this morning, the American legal system allowed his adolescence, his whiteness, his privilege, allowed him the privilege of innocence. Most of my youth group would not be afforded such privilege. Last night, I had a conversation with Kristen Henning. Kristen Henning is a law professor at Georgetown, leading their juvenile law clinic, and the author of a new book recently released called The Rage of Innocence: How America Criminalizes Black Youth. In 26 years of service in the juvenile unit in Washington, D.C., 26 years defending and showing up for clients, for young people in that city. In 26 years, she had 4 white clients. Part of what she talks about is the construction of adolescence, which is pretty recent in our memory. Only in the 1950s and 60s did we begin to honor something between childhood and adulthood as a staging ground in and of itself for human development. Only in this recent period, 2 generations, the lifespan of the Children's Defense Fund, have we even had something in our consciousness called adolescence that we began to study and care for and curate youth groups for. And that construction, she argues from her research, is a construction that was created in order to provide the space of privilege for young, middle-class, white children to make mistakes in a way that young Black children are not allowed. Frankly, the cut line of the book, which you should still get, is that we don't allow black children to be children in America. And Sister Sunni, I have to pastor that. I was prepared to pastor that as a black child in the black church wrestling with change. As a black child in the black church, I learned how to speak and orate because I was giving Easter speeches before I did anything else. As a black child in the black church, I learned how to run a meeting. Because on Saturday mornings at Union Missionary Baptist Church, everything we did in the youth group was run by Robert's Rules of Order. I was prepared for the exchange of public dialogue in a democratic environment in the country by the way we situated ourselves in church. I was prepared with elocution, and I was prepared for the public stage in the black church, a space in which I might find sanctuary and safety to be a child. While America did not allow the adolescence that is afforded to white children, in the black church, I was allowed to mess up, to screw up, and somebody took care of me. And we, when I was growing up, didn't have professional youth pastors like I became for 8 years. We had somebody's mama who ran the youth group and somebody else's mama who ran Vacation Bible School. And they created the space for us to be children, singing, laughing, dancing, memorizing the books of the Bible, preparing in our Bible drills, sword drills we called them. And that space created for me an opportunity to form identity while making mistakes with loving, caring people around. Even in the midst of a nation and a country that would not allow me the same. I was formed, I was shaped, I was given space to be a child and an adolescent in the black church. It was in the black church where I found my being and my identity, and also where I saw Ernest. Ernest, who faithfully served the church. Ernest, who was there every time the doors opened. Ernest, who took care of the little old ladies and did whatever the pastor wanted, not be able to be fully himself because his identity was spoken of from the pulpit and from the chancel as if he was not fully human because of whom he loved. In the same place that formed me and gave me a sense of identity that I could change things in the world, in that pulpit that I looked up to and saw my uncles and saw great pastors and saw people who invested in me, I had to look down from that place to see a woman preach the gospel as powerfully as those men and wonder why she had to stand on the floor while they got to sit in the pulpit. That place that gave me space was also a problematic place, not just when I was young and had questions because I had to sit in that place and look over at the casket of my brother who was killed in community violence and look up at my mother and know that that place had no answers for her because that was out of order. I came to serve that place as a youth pastor in St. Louis, and serving for 8 years in a community that formed and shaped me, I tried to help and create the space that my mama created for me, that those other mothers created for those who were my cousins, my kin, my family coming up in church. And as a youth pastor, I saw a young man named Jordan who approximated the position I was in before, trying to form identity. Jordan was an usher like I was. My first Navy blazer was an usher's blazer. Jordan wore a black and white uniform and wore the gloves. I met him at 10 years old. I sought to serve him through that period of adolescence. I thought I was doing a good job, but perhaps it was the stigma that space created on psychological and mental challenges that gave Jordan a class and a category of things that he couldn't talk to me about. And so he didn't make it through that wrestling and ultimately came to die by suicide. He was faithful to that space. He was formed in that space. There was loving relationships in that space, and yet there were circumscriptions that did not allow him to fully be himself, open himself to become and to be. I still love that space. I still formed in that space. I still wrestle with that space. I still serve that space. And I'm glad that I kept wrestling with it because later I needed to open the space. I got a call in August of 2014, and there were young people from all over the country who were coming to our community, coming because another 18-year-old, not a white one with an AR rifle, but a black one who was walking down the street, was killed by police. His name was Michael Brown. And young people from all over the country were preparing to come to bear witness, to grieve, to give the ministry of presence to their sisters and brothers who were in community, and to go tell the story all over the country. And the local university, the HBCU, would not host them. The museum that was paid for with tax dollars and supposed to be open to all people would not host them. And they had already begun to mobilize, and with 48 hours left, they had no place to be. And so they called the black pastor. Not because they liked church so much, they just needed a space. And the black church is really the only space that we own without accountability to white gaze. And so the new university president had to wonder about what the governor was going to say, because it's a state school, and the leaders at the museum had to wonder about what the mayor was going to say, because it's a public entity. But the black pastor had a bit of freedom to say, well, y'all come, do whatever you need to do. And they weren't church folk. They didn't like church much. There was lots of hurt from what the church had disallowed in their becoming and their being. But they needed a room. And so, the most valuable asset sometimes we have as people of faith is real estate. So we gave it away, and they transformed the space. They transformed our congregation, such that at the end of that celebration, on Sunday morning, I told them, do whatever you need to do wherever you are, and if some of y'all want to come to church, come worship with us. Are you sure? They say. You will allow us, trans folk, you will allow us, openly gay folk, you will allow us in your sanctuary? It ain't mine. And as we proclaimed and preached, a message about not the religion, not the precepts, not the ordinances, but the politics of Jesus. And we did what we Baptists do, even in the UCC church. We opened the doors of the church. Down came the aisle, transformed young people, 9 years old, raised Muslim, to come and make me her Christian pastor. Tandiwe Abdullah, in the context of the church, a black child in the black church came to a space of identification with change. She didn't become Christian. She wasn't converted. But the movement transformed the people of faith. The black church as sanctuary lived in its vocation. And change happened for a young woman who has been fighting and mobilizing young people across the country, from the March for Our Lives to the Ferguson Uprising, to holding accountable prosecutors in Los Angeles, and now creating a little bit of havoc on Howard University's campus. When we live in our vocation, even these traditions can serve black children in the context of our mission as black church if we're willing to lean into change. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
That was rich. I mean, that was a whole sermon and service, and there's so much that we can unpack, and we'll have a little bit more time to have a fuller dialogue. You know, I'm just really fascinated by a couple of things. And when you talk about, you know, there's just not space in America for black children to be children, right? They're not afforded that space to be young and to err and to mess up, right? And to have the opportunity of second chances. So let me just say, one of the most things I appreciate most about being at Haley Farm, because everybody talks about it, it is a place where you can just bring your kids and let them run.
Yes.
And never worry about it. And I've brought my children to Haley Farm and hadn't seen them for hours and never worry,
You know
because
okay.
the community had them.
Yeah.
Right? And that's the space that you all have created, and I appreciate it. So one, like, how do we create more of that space within community for our children to be children?
Yeah.
But then also, you as youth pastor, presumably to lead youth, right, also are being led by them. Right, to be transformed and changed yourself. And what does it mean to be open, right, to that kind of transformation? To be, you know, as even the Bible says, a child shall lead them, but we don't take that seriously.
That's right.
Right? We still leading children and telling a child to stay in a child's place and the like. And so when these young people who are non-conformists to anything respectable or religious come and say, no, these are the problems that we're facing. This is what's going on in our community. These are the responses that we need from you. And we need you to be changed by that and let us lead you for a little while. I mean, what is that like as a pastor, as a youth pastor as well?
Yeah, I think there are two things we got to hold on to. And again, I'm talking black church. I'm not talking black Christianity necessarily. Right? Two things that are critical to our existence, and I think they're deeply theological. Number one is the problem of pain. How can we be sensitive to and responsive to the moment and the realities in people's lives in the moment? And the other is the promise of progeny. Deeply religious in most traditions, that the essence of hope is that things can get better, and the sign of that is the child. And so if we begin to see young people as promise and not as property, which is what many of our theologies have done to us, particularly evangelical theologies, right? We have begun to talk about children as private property, the responsibility of the family, not a communal good, a communal responsibility. Then if we see those in that way, then we begin to do different things. Listen to children, affirm the agency of children, and just do stuff like do good Bible study. For the Christians in the room, let's do some good Bible study. Let's not be confused by the pictures. Most of the pictures of the disciples we see have good full beards like Dr. McCormack. The disciples, as we see in one story in Matthew, they go into the temple to make sacrifice. The amount of sacrifice, all the disciples go, the amount of sacrifice that is given is a sacrifice for 2 adults. Only disciple above the age of accountability is Peter. The others begin their religious training when most begin their religious training at the age of 12 or 13. We live in the context of in a tradition in Christianity. When Jesus says, suffer the little children to come unto me and forbid them not, he was literally talking about children because he was rolling with teenagers. 11 of the 12 disciples are youth. But most of us don't give them votes in the church meeting. And so we are in a tradition that was founded by those who turned the world upside down, Scripture suggests. And those were young people. And if we begin to listen to young people today, to walk with them as closely as Jesus modeled in his own ministry, engaging in dialogical tensions and conversations, then we open up space for our own transformation of our communities and of ourselves. And for the Christians, we would be more like Jesus.
We're going to have to pause right there and come back in conversation, but that's rich already. I'm loving the way this conversation is going already.